Well, good morning again. It's great to be together and to continue on in our series in Exodus. And I want to start by asking a question. And the question is this: have you ever felt like you've bit off more than you can chew? Like there's things going on in your life and they're great things, but for whatever reason, something else comes up and you decide that you should get involved in it. And in the middle of getting involved with it, you realized it might have been too much for you to handle well. And a result of biting off more than you chew means that you decided to do something good, and what you sacrifice sometimes in those moments is your sanity and your sleep and your whatever it takes to get those things done that need to get done. And it can constantly feel like there's not enough hours in a day and not enough days in a week. Have you ever felt that way before? I know for me, it's like last time I was preaching about anxiety, and I let you know that's like a serious struggle in my life. And then I'm preparing for this week, and I'm like, man, another area in my life where I'm like just constantly falling flat. I'm just taking on too many things and not delegating things and feeling overwhelmed. And so that's really what this passage is about this morning. And what I love about this passage as well is we've been looking through some pretty extraordinary things in the book of Exodus, right? You think about the plagues and the Red Sea crossing, and we looked at manna and water coming from incredible places and God's provision in supernatural ways. There's all these supernatural, extraordinary events going on, but in this chapter, we have a chance to step away from those things and to step into just an ordinary day in the life of Moses. You just kind of get like a behind the scenes, a day in the life of what it looked like to be this servant of God. And it's so refreshing, right? Because I think that really reflects the majority of our days. And I want to read from you a quote from Warren Wiersbe because I think he kind of marries together what Pastor Paul was talking about last week and where we find ourselves today in such a powerful way. He says this: after reading about trials, complaints, and battles of the Israelites, it's a relief to move into a chapter that describes the camp of Israel as a quiet place of family fellowship and daily business, which really is going to reflect the majority of the days in the next 40 years of their life. Life isn't always about hunger and thirst and warfare, although those are often the things we usually remember. Charles Spurgeon said that God's people are prone to engrave their trials in marble and write their blessings in the sand, and perhaps he was right. As Christians, we're often tempted to engrave our trials in marble and write our blessings in the sand. That's so true of my life. Right? If someone's asking what's going on or something, how are you doing? If you get to the grid of things, that I'm really being honest about where I'm at, the things that are most engraved in my heart are trials and tribulations that I'm facing. And it's so often I stop and I don't remember or reflect on the blessings that God's placed in my life. Isn't it true? Those things like a wave comes in, washes it away, and it's almost like that never happened. But that's the majority of our days. God's watching out for us, taking care for us, providing for us. And even things like the blessings of moms we can take for granted. And so here's an opportunity for us to just step into an ordinary day in the life of Moses and to see some of his family relationships. We're going to spend the first half of the sermon looking at their family reunion that takes place, and we'll spend the second half looking at some wise advice that Jethro gives. And so we'll start with the family reunion. Exodus chapter 18, verses 1 to 6. Moses' father-in-law Jethro, the priest of Midian, heard about everything that God had done for Moses and for God's people Israel when the Lord brought Israel out of Egypt. And so word had spread all the way to Midian what God had been doing for Moses and the Israelites. Now Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, had taken in Zipporah, Moses' wife, after he had sent her back. And so something happened on that trip to Egypt the first time when Moses is heading there. There's that situation in Exodus chapter 4 about the circumcision of his children. And so sometime most likely after that, before he gets to see Pharaoh, he sends his family back, likely because he doesn't know exactly what's going to happen and he wants to keep them safe. And so from that time until now, Moses hasn't seen his father-in-law, his wife, or his 2 boys. Verse 3, along with her 2 boys, one of whom was named Gershom, because Moses had said, I've been a resident alien in a foreign land, and the other Eleazar, because he had said, the God of my fathers was my helper and rescued me from Pharaoh's sword. Moses' father-in-law Jethro, along with Moses' wife and sons, came to him in the wilderness where he camped at the mountain of God. He sent word to Moses, I, your father-in-law Jethro, am coming to you with your wife and her 2 sons. And so you can imagine this incredible family reunion that would have been taking place. Just think about it. Sometimes we think about these characters in the Bible and we forget that they're just regular people. But think about how often Moses was thinking about his family as he was in Egypt, like witnessing the plagues, for example. The different times he was wondering, what are the boys up to today? How's my wife doing? She's kind of on her own. She's taking care of the boys, and they're pretty busy sometimes. I wonder how she's doing. And there would have been times where Moses was grateful that his boys and his wife weren't with them, right? When those awesome plagues of God were taking place, there's part of those things that they would have been glad that they never had to see. But then there's other things where I'm sure he wished, man, I wish my wife and my boys were here to see the Red Sea part. I wish they had gotten to walk across on dry ground. And so Moses is going to get an opportunity to share firsthand what he experienced, the highs and the lows of what God allowed to happen in and through him. And so it would have been an incredible time of reunion for this beautiful family. You can just imagine how excited he was when he heard the announcement his family was on the way to visit him. But I also wanted to just take a moment and I want to balance out this incredible and beautiful family reunion, because this really is an amazing family, and they're going to share a meal together, and they clearly loved and cared for each other. But I also want to let you know that this wasn't a perfect family. And it's like sometimes you read stories in the Bible and there's like lots of not perfect families, but sometimes like, well, there was that one perfect family, and maybe Moses' family comes to mind in that situation. But I wanted to show for you just behind the scenes a little bit about some of the family drama that was taking place. Numbers chapter 12, verses 1 to 2 says the following. Miriam and Aaron criticized Moses because of the Cushite woman he married, for he had married a Cushite woman. They said, does the Lord speak only through Moses? Does he not also speak through us? And the Lord heard it. And so you just need to remember the family relationships here, right? So this is Moses' older brother and sister. And they didn't have a lot of good things to say about Moses' wife, which you can imagine probably triggered some family discourses that weren't always amicable, right? When this situation came up, and Zipporah's like, Moses, I told you your brother and sister didn't like me. I've been telling you for years, and you always said I was making it up. They literally are telling everybody that they don't like me, that they have a problem with me. And so that would have caused some difficulties. Imagine for the boys. This is Uncle Aaron and Aunt Miriam, and they're making very clearly known to everyone, I actually don't really like your mom, which probably means he had hard feelings towards them because of this mixed marriage. And that would have been hurtful, right, for the boys and for Zipporah. And so this would have been hard for them to recognize and realize. God, unfortunately, in the rest of the story, makes it very clear to them that God was actually okay with what had happened, and so that would have been incredible as well. But I just want to point that out to not over-romanticize this family reunion. There was family difficulties that were taking place as well, and so hopefully that allows you to feel yourselves perhaps a little bit more able to relate to this family, because the reality is we all have families that aren't perfect, that sometimes can be dysfunctional. And in this story, I don't know if you caught that, in Exodus chapter 18 verses 1 to 6, it mentions the boys' names again. And obviously Moses is the one that's writing the book of Exodus. And so if he was writing this, he could have just wrote down the boys' names, Gershom and Eleazar. But he explains here for a second what the meaning of their names truly is. Because he understood that God had demonstrated something pretty powerfully. These boys' names meant more to them than when he had simply given it to them. The first name's Gershom, and it means, I have been a resident alien in a foreign land. And so Moses gives his first son Gershom this name because he had left Egypt. He felt like he no longer was home anymore, and he was raising his family in this foreign land. What isn't it incredible now to think about that name and to realize actually I was always in a foreign land. This was not the land that God had promised me nor promised my forefathers, and he's come and he's rescued me, and now he's taking me to the promised land. All of a sudden that name Gershom meant a little bit more. And his second son Eliezer means the God of my father was my helper and rescued me from Pharaoh's sword. Remember, the reason that he's given this name is because Moses kills an Egyptian and he's running for his life, and he realizes that God allowed him to escape death from the sword of Pharaoh. How much would that name mean now? Where was Pharaoh's swords and all of his armies at this moment? At the bottom of the Red Sea. God had not just rescued Moses for a couple of days, he'd rescued the entire nation. And so Moses is just declaring God's faithfulness in ways that he never expected. He's blown away by who God is, and he's reminded of that through the names of his boys. And so now he's going to give a powerful testimony to his father-in-law and to his family. He's going to share this firsthand experience. Exodus chapter 18, verse 7. So Moses went out to meet his father-in-law, bowed down, and then kissed him. They asked each other how they had been and went into the tent. And this is, again, that little glimpse of an ordinary day, right? So they get to meet each other, they're excited, and it's just their regular conversations. They say hi, they hug each other, and they're saying, like, so how have you been? It's been a while. What have you been up to? How are the Midian people doing? How's your role going? And they're going to exchange what's been going on, but obviously what God has been doing in Moses' life comes to the surface. Verse 8, Moses recounted to his father-in-law all that the Lord had done. In this moment, this would have been a temptation to kind of maybe look a little bit bigger than you are to your father-in-law, which we all kind of have this tendency to do maybe. Right? It's like, you know what, actually, your wife picked pretty well. I mean, I'm leading these people. You know, I left, I was a shepherd, and now look who I am, and not Moses. He's humble. And he says, look at what the Lord has done to Pharaoh and the Egyptians for Israel's sakes. And he explains all the hardships that confronted them on the way and how the Lord rescued them. Jethro rejoiced over all the things the Lord had done for Israel when he rescued them from the power of the Egyptians. Blessed be the Lord, Jethro explained, who rescued you from the power of Egypt and from the power of Pharaoh. He has rescued the people from under the power of Egypt. And so there's this powerful testimony of what God has been doing in and through Moses' life. And the main theme, did you catch that there? Is that God had rescued them. Everybody in that known world at that time knew that God had rescued the people of Israel in an incredible way. And Moses just got to play a small part in this. So I don't know, I can't imagine what that interaction would have been like. They're explaining, it's like, yeah, like, you know, I did this thing, I like put my staff in the water and things turned to blood, and there was frogs. You wouldn't believe the amount of frogs there were, and the gnats, and the darkness, and the Passover meal, and the crossing the Red Sea, and they just got to explain all of these things that God had done, both good things and hard things. And this is a powerful testimony of what God had done in their life. And so how does Jethro respond? Exodus chapter 18, verse 11. Now I know that the Lord is greater than all the gods, because he did wonders when the Egyptians acted arrogantly against Israel. Then Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, brought a burnt offering and sacrificed to God, and Aaron came with all the elders of Israel to eat a meal with Moses' father-in-law in God's presence. And so here, after hearing this testimony firsthand, Jethro admits what we all know is true, is that the Lord is greater than all gods. This would have been a question in Jethro's life. We don't really know if he was a believer or if he was kind of a pagan. It's a little bit confusing, but he was this priest, and there was all these different gods, and they were all kind of competing for power. And as Moses declares what God has done, there's no more competition. He knows very clearly there's no one like the God of Israel. There are no other gods. He is greater than all gods. And sometimes you need to insert yourself in the time of history that you're in, because up until this point, like, we look at this and we're like, yeah, I mean, God's done so many things for so many years in such great ways that are undeniable. Well, for someone like Jethro, the great things that God has done up to that point is creation, which no one got to witness that was like around anymore, but they're going to believe that God created everything. That's great. The flood, okay, that's like a big thing and kind of crazy, and that's what God did. And then God picked this guy named Abraham, and he had a son when he was old, and then he had a kid, and then he had a kid, and then Joseph did some cool things. That's like all the great things that God had done. A promise to a family, the flood, and creation. And so now he's able to experience and hear about what God has done, and there's no question in his mind that there are no other gods like the God of Israel. And so with these things in mind, just this normal day in the life of Joseph, as they're recounting some of those things that they were going on in their lives, how would we apply that to our lives today? Well, I think it goes back to that quote that I read about etching things in stones, about trials and tribulations, and kind of sweeping under the rug sometimes those blessings that we have. What we need to do more often, what I need to do more often, is I need to praise God for the family he has given me, functional or dysfunctional, right? Just thank God for the fact that he's given me the family that he's given me. Moses is enjoying that at this time. And it's not, I mean, Mother's Day is a day where we stop and do that, but how often do we regularly just say, God, thank you for the family you've given me. I know it's not perfect and know that we're trying, but I'm just so grateful for that blessing. We need to remind ourselves and your family of God's mighty hand of faithfulness and rescue. We need to stop and remember things that God have done, and we need to talk about them as a family, and we need to share about them with our children. I mean, talk about an incredible situation where Moses gets to explain this deliverance that was so supernatural, how God rescued them from slavery. And then think about how often the discussion comes up at the dinner table or with your children or with your spouse when you're stopping and reflecting about how God rescued you. Right? How God rescued you from the eternal punishment of sin and slavery to sin by sending his son, Jesus Christ, to die on the cross for your sin, how he rescued you by the precious blood of Jesus Christ. It's a blessing that we so frequently take for granted. And it's so incredible that when we stop and we are grateful for what God has given us and we reflect on what he's done, that pushes us to respond by declaring that God is great. And so that's what happens in this family setting here. Obviously, a very powerful demonstration of that, but that pales in comparison to the powerful gospel that we get to cling to and the good news of Christ coming and dying on our behalf. And so there's this incredible family reunion. And then following this family reunion, Jethro's going to give some very practical advice. And so we get to see this family reunion, and then in verse 13, we see what Moses gets to do the very next day. What's Moses doing the next day? Verse 13, the next day, Moses sat down to judge the people, and they stood around Moses from morning until evening. When Moses' father-in-law saw everything he was doing for them, he asked, what is it that you're doing for the people? Why are you alone sitting as a judge while all the people stand around you from morning until evening? Okay, and so this is like maybe some pro-marriage advice here. If you haven't seen your family for a really long time, okay, maybe the best idea to not do the next day is to work from morning until evening because your family misses you. And so Jethro's going to call that out here, but I think we'd be remiss to not understand that I'm pretty sure Zipporah probably noticed as well. She's like, hey, Moses, I've been watching the kids on my own for a while, and you've been working all day, and it'd be nice for you to come home, and where are you at? And so Jethro's going to say, Moses, what is it that you're doing? How do you possibly think you're going to be able to work from morning until evening and accomplish this? Why are you doing this alone? And so here's Moses' reply. I think it's a pretty good one. Moses replied to his father-in-law, because the people come to me to inquire of God. Whenever they have a dispute, it comes to me, and I make the decision between one man and another. I teach them God's statutes and laws. And so Moses is like, hey, Jethro, I don't know if you've been around listening to what I'm saying, but I'm literally just telling people about God all day. I'm like telling them, I'm helping them understand and explain to them how God operates, the rules and regulations that God's beginning to set in place. When they're having issues, I step in and I counsel them. Jethro, I'm busy doing God's work all day long. What do you mean what I'm doing with my time? I'm just serving God with all my might. And how does Jethro respond? What you're doing is not good. What you're doing is not good, Moses. And I'd be like, wait a second, Jethro, you just showed up, okay? You got that little tribe of Midian going on and that priest thing. I'm trying to lead a nation by God's strength and by his might for his glory. What do you mean what I'm doing is wrong? All I'm doing is things for God from the moment that I open my eyes to the moment that I shut them. So why? Why is this wrong? Jethro's going to answer that question in verse 18. You will certainly wear out both yourself and these people who are with you because the task is too heavy for you. You can't do it alone. What's wrong, Moses? What's wrong isn't what you're doing, it's how much you're doing. Moses, what's wrong is that if you can continue at this pace, you're going to burn yourself out, and that burden is going to become too heavy. Moses, you can't do this alone. You can't do this alone. And so when we think of our own lives, how many of us need to hear this message this morning? You can't do it alone. You need help. You might be doing great and good things all day long, but if you're doing too much of it, it's not sustainable. You can't do it alone. And I don't know why it's so easy for us to know that we need help, but so hard for us to ask for it. Isn't that true? I know I need help all the time. There's a difference. I was like, I could just use some help with this. And it's like, but I'm not going to ask anybody because that would show that I can't do it, and I can do it, and watch me go. Right? We have those conversations to ourselves all day long, every single day. And if we're doing too many things, even if they're good things, the Bible would say that that is not good. That you need help. And that you need to stop what you're doing and look for that help. Because otherwise, you're going to burn yourselves out. And so, just take that to heart for a second. Are there some areas where you just know you need to ask for extra help? Moms this morning, do you ever feel like there's too much on your plate, and if you have to go one more day, you're going to burn out? I'd encourage you this morning, just tell someone that you could use a hand. It's a hard thing to do. But there's other ladies in this church that would love to come alongside you and to help you, to be there for you and to pray for you. You don't have to do it alone. And so that's what Jethro is trying to explain. And so he's going to tell him what you should do. He says in verse 19, now listen to me, I will give you some advice, and God be with you. You be the one to represent the people before God and bring their cases to him, instruct them about the statutes and law, and teach them the way to live and what they must do. For the record, Moses was doing these things. So he's saying those things that you're doing, focus on all those things. But he says in verse 21, but you should select from all the people able men, God-fearing, trustworthy, and hating dishonest profit. Place them over the people as commanders of thousands, hundreds, fifties, and tens. They should judge the people at all times. Then they can bring you every major case, but judge every minor case themselves. And this way you will lighten your load, and they will bear it with you. If you do this, and God so directs you, you will be able to endure, and all these people will be able to go home satisfied. And so the very practical instructions that Jethro gives Moses is just, you need help. Let's try to find that help for you, Moses. Well, what you're doing is just too many things. There's gifts that God has given you, and I'm encouraging you, Moses, to use those gifts that God has given you and the time that he's given you And those other things where you could use some help, get some people and put them around you and let them encourage you and work together and bear that burden with you. And as you do that, then together you'll be successful in ministering to me. And I think that's it's so incredible what happens and how Moses responds to this in verse 24. It says, Moses listened to his father-in-law and did everything he said. So Moses chose able men from all of Israel and made them leaders over the people as commanders of thousands, hundreds, fifties, and tens. In Numbers chapter 12, verse 3, it gives us it kind of points out to us a little bit where this attitude comes from. It says this about Moses. This is actually right after that passage about his wife Zipporah and the conflict that was going on there between Aaron and Miriam. Verse 3, Moses was a very humble man, more so than anyone on the face of the earth. And so what Moses does here is he just admits it. He says, you know what, Jethro? You're right. I've been running this race on zero gas for far too long. You're right, Jethro, I need help. And I'm not going to pretend that I can do this on my own any longer. And he's humble. And he says, I'm going to look for this help that I need. And sometimes people probably in Israel were criticizing Moses because they were thinking, remember when Moses cared about us more? Remember that time? You know, when he wasn't just so busy doing the teaching and the instructing, and he'd actually sit with us and he'd spend time with us and he'd listen to our concerns. Wow, look at Moses now. He's way too great for that. He's like so busy doing those important things. He doesn't have time for those little things. And can you imagine how that would have broke Moses' heart? Because Moses genuinely wanted to do that. He wanted to be there with the people. He wanted to come alongside each and every one of them and walk through every situation in their life and hold their hands and weep with them and celebrate with them. That's what Moses wanted to do, but there wasn't enough hours in a day for him to accomplish that. And so what does he do? He says, I can't care for you the way that I should, so I'm going to get people and put them around me so we can accomplish this in a way that's good for you and healthy for me. And that must have been hard. I really think that must have been difficult because there's probably different times he wished he could have been there for some things going on in people's lives, but he was willing to say, I'm not able to do this on my own. That's what humility looks like. Humility is understanding our limits. It's not just saying yes to everything and pushing on. It's just humbly admitting this is as much as I can do and I can't do more than that. And in fact, to do more wouldn't glorify God. And so I just think first and foremost, just as just kind of a personal application for me, but I think is important in the context of church, is as I slowly grow, I'm realizing I can't do everything. I can't. I'm not able to be involved in everything that's going on in our church. I'm not able to spend as much time with people as I'd love to spend each and every day. I'm just not able to do everything. This week was an example of that for me. I just said yes to too many things. And I realized that the result of that was not enough time with my family. And I'm not saying that because I'm complaining. I'm just saying that because I understand. I'm not saying and I'm also not saying I'm comparing myself to Moses or anybody important. I'm just saying if Moses couldn't do it, I know I can't do it. And so I would just encourage us as a church, as we continue to grow, and I am so excited about what God is doing here in this church, that if God puts things on your heart about ministries and opportunities where we could serve, I would love to be able to come alongside you and encourage you, but I can't do that for you. There's so many great opportunities that people share, and I love it, and I love hearing about it, and I love how it's clearly the Holy Spirit stirring up something in your heart. And I would just say, just go for it. We'll be there. We'll support you. We'll encourage you. We'll give you any sort of tools or training that you need to help accomplish that, but I just can't do all of those things for you. I wish that I could, but that would mean me trying to live outside the boundaries that God has set. And so that doesn't mean, I'm not saying hey, I'm just going to lock myself in my office and never spend time. That is not what I'm saying. I'm just saying that I just need to make sure that I don't say yes to every opportunity that comes in our way. And so I would just say that in a sense that if I've had some of these discussions with people, and so I'm not pointing fingers, but if I say things like, I'm just that's a great idea, why don't you think about that for a little bit longer? Or why don't we bring that to the board? It's just me trying to say, I don't think that that's a bad idea. If you just keep handing me ideas and hoping that I run with them, it's just not going to happen. That actually wouldn't glorify the Lord. All right, so that's a church application. And I think I just wanted to share with that because I just also think it's a New Testament principle that we see in Acts chapter 6. We won't turn there, but there's the example of the disciples and the apostles, and they're doing things, and they realize that there's too much on their plate, and so they try to get help. And so I would just encourage you this morning that for myself, for our ministry leaders, when you hear the announcements from the front like, hey, we could use more help with blank, that's just simply someone saying, we're giving it all that we got, and we need you to help us as well. And so the application for this, for our church, I would just say, would be me genuinely just saying, help me, help us, help our ministry leaders accomplish what God wants to do in and through our church. Find a way where you can get involved and use the gifts that God's given you for His honor and for His glory. So I would just say, let's help each other. Let's work together as a body of believers to do things that only God can do. And I love, and I struggle with, but I love that God has made and designed us to do things together as a team. Right? To be dependent on Him, yes, first and foremost, but then not to do things on our own. That's why there's family. That's why there's church. Even Jesus Christ, as He goes out, He has disciples, right? You realize that Jesus, the all-powerful God, could have just went around and did everything. He really didn't. He actually had unlimited power, but He decided to surround Himself with a team, and they supported Him and helped Him, and that's the way God designed us, to work as a team. And so that's a church application. But then the next thing, the last thing I want to do is just to how would we apply that maybe to our lives personally? When we think about the limits that God has set and trying to take on too many things. You just need to ask yourself the question, are you doing too much and at risk of wearing yourself out? Are there too many things that you're doing that you're actually at risk of wearing yourself out? And if you aren't sure, there's a couple people you could check with. If you have a spouse, I would check with them. You'll know the answer to that question very quickly. Right? If you have some friends and family, you could ask them as well. Because it's important for us to live inside the constraints that God has set for us. I learned this most clearly, and I still struggle to apply it to my life, from a book called Lead by Paul David Tripp. And he says this, and it's this that just stuck with me. It's kind of like in the middle of COVID, I was going through some things, and it says this. It says, the only limitless being in the cosmos is its creator. Everyone and everything has been designed by God with limits, and it never works, and it never results in anything good to attempt to live, minister, and lead outside of the boundaries or the limits God has set. And so one of the most annoying limits that God set in His perfect design that I struggle with is that He decided to only put 24 hours in a day. Right? I'm like, God, 27 would have been so much more convenient. Right? I could have, that extra 2 hours of sleep, I'd get it every day. That those one or two things I never get to, I'd get them done. Just 3 more hours in a day, God. But God designed 24 hours. When He made creation and He said it was good, it had 24-hour days and 7-day weeks. And any time I try to do more than is possible to accomplish in 24 hours, what I'm saying is that I want to take God's place. I want to be the one person that can do limitless things. I can do more things in a day than are possible to accomplish in a day. I want to live outside my limits. And in that moment, I'm saying I want to be God. Because the only person without limits is God Himself. And He created us with limits so that we would depend on Him and we would depend on each other. And so how many times, I find myself thinking about this literally every week when I'm complaining about not getting enough done, and Carla's a great encouragement to me and this all the time. It's like, hey, God made 24 hours in a day, and you have to sleep. So that gives you a whole lot less hours in a day. And so am I trying to tell God that he made a mistake and that I'd prefer to be him? Or am I just going to rest in the fact that, God, this was the best that I could do today? Before you, I did everything I could today to honor and glorify you, and now I'm going to shut my eyes, and I'm going to sleep, and I'm going to rest that you have this in control. How many more hours of sleep would you get in a week if you could go to bed thinking that? Just before God, here's my day. I gave it all I got. I worked an appropriate amount of hours. I spent some time with my family. I spent some time in your word. And now I'm just going to go to sleep. And I'm going to trust that that was all I needed to do. And I'm going to wake up tomorrow. I'm going to trust you for strength for tomorrow, not for what I can do by staying up later tonight to accomplish one more thing. That's how God designed us to live, inside the limits that he set. And living outside of that in God's eyes is not good. And so I hope that as I share this morning, you don't feel like I'm rebuking you. This is something that I just constantly have to preach to myself day in and day out. God, help me to live the way that you created me to live. God, help me to demonstrate that. God, let me do that in such a way that my family senses that I'm not just talking about it, that I'm actually doing it. And I have a lot growing to do in this area. And so I'd encourage you with that, to live inside the limits that God has set for you, because that's what's good. And the incredible thing is that when you do that, you can pray about God raising up people to come alongside you and to help you, whether that's your spouse, whether that's your kids, whether that's other people in this faith community. Just share your concerns with one another, and together we can glorify God each and every day. Let's pray. Dear Lord, thank you so much for this day. God, I thank you for the awesome privilege we have to be encouraged by your word. God, I thank you that it instructs us. God, I thank you for practical examples of this. Lord, you knew we would struggle with this. God, we do struggle with this. And so, God, I pray that you would help us to have the humility that Moses did to just say, God, I'm at my breaking point. God, I need help. God, send people to come alongside and to do the work that you've set for us to do. God, if there's anyone here this morning that's just feeling like maybe they have this figured out, I praise you that they've perhaps learned this lesson. But God, if they're feeling like they have extra time, maybe the burden that you're placing on their heart is that they would step into what you're doing, that they would get involved in serving and encouraging people who so desperately need it. God, I thank you for what you're doing in our church. God, I thank you how you're continuing to grow us. And Lord, if there's someone here this morning that is already in that spot where they feel like they're totally burnt out, God, I pray that you would encourage their hearts this morning, not to try harder, but to look for someone to come alongside and to help. God, I thank you for this body of believers. I thank you for your church. It's in your precious and holy name we pray. Amen.